My name is Ivan Mboa, and I'm the Managing Director at Tala, responsible for our East Africa business. Tala is a mobile technology and data science company, which began operations 7 years ago in Kenya. And it was really formed around trying to create a solution to solve the problem of financial access. Our founder and CEO, Shivani Siroya, had spent her career working with Citigroup and also the UN. And she was confounded by why many credit-worthy but underserved individuals could not access financial services. And so together with a number of other individuals, she put together the origins of Tala, which would allow any individual with access to an Android phone to download our app from the Google Play Store. And after going through a couple of questions, go through a credit underwriting process, which would enable them to access instant credit in typically less than 5 minutes. So today, we've been able to extend that service to well over 6 million individuals with over $2 billion in loans dispersed across 4 markets and 3 continents, and Kenya is where this began. I think we've experienced a lot of the challenges that are associated with introducing something novel into a market. Similar to what M-Pesa experienced, many times when you're introducing a product that has not existed in the market, there are no rules around it. But very quickly, as policymakers and lawmakers and society begin to sort of see the effects of your product, regulation typically follows innovation. So some of the challenges that we've had are that many times the regulation is reactive as opposed to proactive, right? So for example, today in Kenya with fintech, the industry has mushroomed tremendously. We've grown from Tala really being the #1 and first provider in 2014, and today there are possibly 300 fintech startups. With the growth of these 300 fintech startups, we now have issues around consumer protection issues. And this is everything from the pricing that consumers face to how they're treated in collections. And so regulation today is actually, unfortunately, responding to some of the negative effects that have accompanied growth, but it isn't necessarily enabling future growth. It's really very reactive and almost punitive. So these are some of the challenges that we'd face as a fintech startup in Africa, where policymakers typically react to some of the more negative outcomes associated with growth of the industry, as opposed to balancing it out and ensuring that an industry can still grow while protecting consumer interests. I think startups have a great role to play in informing policy decisions. We as Tala and along with 10 other members actually formed the first industry-wide association. We called it the Digital Lenders Association in Kenya. And the reason why that was critical is because policymakers don't want to listen to the interests of just one company, right? It was important that as the industry players could come together in one group, it would add a lot more legitimacy to what was being said. And really allow us to take meetings with, we've actually met with members of the Central Bank of Kenya, with members of the Treasury, with members of Parliament. So I think the first role startups have in sort of informed policy decisions is to organize themselves appropriately, ideally in an industry grouping. Second, I think, is being able to sort of tell the impact story. Like, why is it important? Why is it a good thing that you should exist? Especially when there's a very strong counter narrative that's just focused on the negative outcomes associated with growth of your industry. So I think that startups are the best place to tell their story, as opposed to letting other people tell their story on their behalf. And of course, third, in many ways, startups are always on the edge of innovation, right? And so we have a responsibility to educate potential policymakers and legislators around the products that we're putting to the market, why we're doing so that they can essentially create enabling policy frameworks as they think about regulating our space. I think my dream for Africa's mobile economy is that I continue to see even more innovation. Kenya, Africa as a whole, has become home to essentially mobile money, right? We have the greatest usage numbers across the population. I'd like us to sort of continue building upon it. I'd sort of think of the first stage of the mobile economy really was, can I effectively store value, which was airtime, on my device, which was proven. Next was, can I transfer this value to another individual? And that sort of led to the onset of M-Pesa and other sort of mobile money platforms. And I think really the third layer, or the third stage of this sort of mobile economy now is essentially seeing, can we get to the point that a large portion of the economy begins to actually derive their income of products and services sold on this mobile economy? It's not just a medium of exchange, but in many ways, there are entire jobs which have never been thought about, which could be created in and related to this mobile economy. So yeah, that's really my dream, is that we continue to advance this going forward. It doesn't just stop at transferring value, that there are more and more people who derive a livelihood from the mobile economy. And we really tell our story as Africans to really solve many of the challenges that we face.
So my name is Joshua Harrow. I am the ecosystem engagement lead at Brighter Bridges. So that's what I do on a daily basis. Brighter Bridges is a data-focused research firm based here in Nairobi. So we started way back in 2018 by way of showcasing innovations and the growth that emerging markets had to offer. Our modus operandi then had been to map ecosystems by way of infographics and just even ecosystem maps, innovation maps. So the brand has grown, and as a backdrop to all these mapping, we've been aggregating, collecting, and managing relationships, as well as just building networks with organizations that really care about data transparency, corporate data transparency in emerging markets. So this include investors and founders who really contribute to our mission in providing digestible content to power the next frontier of growth here in Africa and in other emerging markets. Mapping out Africa's tech ecosystems is important because of the inherent uncertainties that sort of befall the African tech ecosystem, right? One of the reasons that has been cited as a source or a cause to these uncertainties has always been the lack of information and data, right? So this information and data has been either unavailable or unreliable. And Brighter Bridges has been doing both by engaging in primary relationship building with hubs, with founders, with investors, to really build trust with them and really try to package and convey this information in a digestible form. So scrapers and crawlers are good, but we have seen that trust has been a key ingredient of the African ecosystem, and we have leveraged on that to really map and bring out the positive aspects of the African tech ecosystem. Some of the biggest challenges are that as mentioned, the African tech ecosystem partly also thrives on a matter of trust. Investor founder relationships are a matter of trust, as well as just the relay of information. So Brighter has been a harbinger, a fast mover in this space. So we've had to really create the infrastructure, create the rails when it comes to corporate data transparency. And what that means is that we've had to be the fast movers, the guys who go out fast to founders and really sell this idea of the importance of data transparency and an open ecosystem. So that has had its challenges because the concept is rather, it's growing, but it's still new. Of course, in other much more advanced markets, you have the likes of Crunchbase and PitchBook. But we have been trying to build something that works for the continent. So with the effects of COVID, really, these relationships have been much more harder to build because of the necessitation to move into a much more virtual front of engagement. So, of course, there's not much events going on. And kind of the human touch to building relationships has been challenged. So those are some of the challenges that I've come to see in my life and at Brighter. So my dream and my, I don't want to have a crystal ball, but my dream when it comes to the African ecosystem, tech ecosystem is kind of caution just one word, and that is democratization, right? Opportunities are going to be much more, far-reaching. When it comes to investing, much more people will have a chance to back entrepreneurs and founders who they like. When it comes to financial inclusion and banking the unbanked, much more democratization, and we also see this happening for information and data. We're going to have growth of the ecosystem that is backed by evidence, backed by a readily available and trustworthy data. And of course, if anything can be taken to be sort of an indication of what will come in the future, of course, growth of startups when it comes to bigger ticket sizes. Of course, we are all aware of the growth that the ecosystem has gotten to see when it comes to unicorns within the fintech sector. We are also seeing a lot of M&A between much more established companies in the developed world and Africa, as well as within African startups themselves. So a lot more consolidation between African founders and collaboration. So that's really is my dream for the African tech ecosystem in the next few years.
Good afternoon. My name is Nimma Jomadugu. I'm a lawyer, a finance lawyer at a law firm, Kenna Partners in Lagos, Nigeria. So the AfCFTA is the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. It was established, or the African Continental Free Trade Area, it was established through an agreement, which, collective effort of 54 countries, 54 African countries. It came into force in 2019. And essentially the agreement's objective is to create a liberalized market for goods and services in Africa to enable ease of movement of goods and services, also to reduce tariffs and non-tariff barriers in the continent. So essentially it is a free trade area agreement to enable ease of movement, ease of goods in the continent. So for the challenges that would come up in implementation, but specifically when we look at the agreement itself, the objectives that are stated in the agreement, that is the AfCFTA, it kind of reads like socioeconomic rights. And if we understand those, it's like the rights that you find in the Constitution, saying rights to free education, rights to healthcare. These things are lofty ideas, but at the end of the day, implementation requires granular treatment. So in this regard, the challenges would be addressing the granular problems on a state-by-state level, as opposed to just the continent-wide large issue. So for me, I have divided them into what I think would be the basic issues that have to be addressed before we move on to even specific things like internet. So we need to address the challenges of protectionism, targeted investment, poor infrastructure, political instability, and research. So protectionism essentially is just the situation where you have countries protecting what they have within the country and not now permitting cross-border trade. If you look at past examples of different African countries closing their borders, it clearly shows that that is a form of protectionism, and this has to be addressed for there to be, a progression with the implementation of the AfCFTA. So poor infrastructure, we've already covered that. Targeted investments, there was a report that for the trade financing in Africa is down or short rather of about $100 billion. So this is something that clearly has to be addressed, because one thing to give money is another thing for there to be targeted investments to the challenges that actually require it. Then of course, political instability is something that have plagued African countries for decades. So this has to be addressed so that when a system ends, there's continuity for the next system to be able to take on the progress that has already been made. The last issue, really, or last challenge would be research. For us to move forward, there has to be research done as to what issues should be specifically addressed and how they should be addressed. So think tanks would at some point in time have to be developed to address these issues. My dream for free trade in Africa is essentially the realization of the AfCFTA. That is a lofty dream, but that's the reality of the situation, that when you read the documents, they are quite long and large and a bit detailed. There is a lot of thoughts that has gone into it. So the dream would be the realization of these reduced trade barriers. It would also be, realistically speaking, something that's closer to what the EU has, that there's a free movement of people, there's a free movement of goods and services. There's also an affordable movement of goods and services. It is much cheaper now to travel to probably England than for me to even go to a nearby African country. So for us to see a development, for us to see the benefits and to reap the benefits and to enjoy the ideals that the AfCFTA has, it would be for us to see where there's a reduced cost of movement of goods and services within Africa. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Olga Chichoncho, and I'm an HR generalist in the People Operations Department at Wave Transfer Limited. I've had the amazing opportunity to work within the African ecosystem, particularly Uganda, over the past 4 years. And it's been very encouraging to see how it has, grown from just a couple of startups, people having ideas, to now established businesses, and a number of them raising capital and investment. So I'm very optimistic about what Africa is going to look like in general over the next decade. A number of people have defined this as the African century, so we hope we'll get it right this time around. That's a great question. Some of the changes that I envision African founders building post-COVID-19 is really the emphasis on understanding the local African context and designing and developing solutions that solve those challenges. It's interesting that you talk about education and healthcare, because I see those as like the pillars of any economy. You have to be healthy to be productive. You have to be educated and aware about how to solve problems in order to take your economy to the next level. So I think COVID has opened our eyes to see a number of the challenges that different sectors and industries have been plagued with the past years that we've been complaining. But it's been a great time to see young African leaders. And when I say leaders, I'm talking about people who are very passionate about solving challenges in their community, challenges in their countries, and challenges for Africa in general. They're rising up and saying, you know what, enough is enough. Let's cut this dependency, mindset that has been, ingrained in us over all these years. Let's address these institutional challenges that have the continent has suffered from, especially looking at those two critical key priority sectors. And they're building solutions that are focused on at the heart of the problem, which is taking on a design-centered approach, a human-centered approach to solve those challenges. So designing solutions with the end user as opposed to for the end user. And, there's a whole lot of science and art that goes into that, but I won't get into much detail. The second element I would really like to touch on is the talent. So increasingly so, I think people are opening up their eyes to seeing that we have this great resource, which is young people who are energetic and can be able to, solve problems, build technology. So how can we then empower them in order to solve some of the solutions, some of the problems that we're seeing in society? So that's also like another critical aspect that I'm starting to see across the continent post-COVID. And then another interesting angle is on the power of connectivity and the power of people. So there's so many spaces that have been created, Twitter, Clubhouse recently, where young African founders are adding their voices to the conversation. Before, we have our African proverb, until the lion learns to write, the story will always glorify the hunter. But we're starting to see lions telling their stories, talking about the African context, the nature of the challenges that the nature of the challenges that they're solving, and what they need in order to solve those problems. So it's very encouraging to see that, Africa's light is still on despite a pandemic. I'll give an example of a startup here called Rocket Health, which was started by a young group of doctors in about 2016 or so. So they are pioneering telemedicine. Of course, if you talked about telemedicine in 2016, people are like, you call the phone, then the doctor comes. How does that work? But now we're seeing it increasingly becoming a critical piece to solving the COVID challenge, especially with physical the social distancing, the physical limitations that COVID has brought. And they're doing such an awesome job. They've digitized their pharmacy. They've created like a whole logistics network to it so that people can, get their deliveries on time. Doctors are making medical consultations. They've integrated with insurance companies to make sure that people are covered, who have insurance cover can be able to access these services. So that's very encouraging to see, people leveraging connectivity and networks of like different pieces and then bringing them together in order to solve that challenge. And lastly, I will end with regulation and policy, because I think that's like a very critical aspect that is going to take us from where we are to where we need to go. And I'm, very happy with the work that Linda Bonyo does at the Tech Lawyers Hub. So, keep doing the good work, Linda and team, to put the conversation of regulation and policy and how it's going to affect and shape the conversation of technology and innovation on the continent. We need to, our policymakers, our regulators, people that make sure that everything is in place from a more, create that enabling environment, are very aware of what's happening, what trends they need to look out for, because the world has changed very, very drastically and will continue to change at a very, very rapid rate. My dream for free trade in Africa. Maybe if I could open up that question a little more, just even outside the scope of trade, because I think the aspect of trade, which is goods for services with money exchanged, or with goods or services exchanged. It's very interesting to see how this has been ingrained in Africa for, I think, since the beginning of time, right? Because we had barter trade where we used to exchange, animals for services, or and then it got monetized down the road. But it's so encouraging to see how people are trading skills, trading ideas, trading time as well, in order to grow the continent. So I know it's a bit off tangent what we're thinking trade, which is more money, but I'm thinking that these are critical elements that are going to take us to that direction, right? I think it's very key that for the next decade, we first invest in our young people, our talent, give them the skills that they need in order to be competitive on a global scale. That's a dream that I have. Because what we're doing is that we are investing in the next leaders, the next business leaders, the next leaders for our governments. So if we teach these young people now what needs to be done, and also shape their like global world perspective of I can actually transform my community with what I have, then it will have a trickle-down effect going down the road. My vision or my dream for Africa is more representation. And again, I'm very encouraged, when I see a lot of Africans, especially our Nigerian brothers, take up big spaces in Uber, spaces in Netflix, because what they're doing is that they're inspiring people like me, inspiring people like, my brothers and sisters to be like, hey, if the pastor, the CMO of Netflix is Nigerian, then, I too can also do that, right? So what that does is the power of representation is it helps people see themselves in other people. So that's a big dream and vision that I have for Africa. How can we start nurturing and building young leaders to see themselves as leaders, as people who solve problems? And also that's through building their confidence and also shaping their view of integrity. Our predecessors have done a good job taking us from where we were 20 years ago to where we are now. But I think where we are now needs a whole different way of thinking, a whole different way of solving problems, and a whole different mindset. The world is moving at a very fast pace, and I always tell people we're in a race. Like, where are we on this race? And that's where I want to see Africa. I want to see Africa top of the race. I want to see Africa as the place where you go to in order to get the best tech talent. I want Africa to be the place where you go to where you get the best talent in design. I want Africa to be, the place where you get women in business to, trade with you and make sure that, your products are at most quality and delivered on time. I want to see more young people taking up spaces and having the confidence to tell their stories and to change that narrative, the global narrative that people have of like Africa's like the poor nation. But it starts with us. How do we see ourselves? How does our community see us? Again, it's a trickle-down effect, right? So myself, my community, my family, and then that trickles down to my workplace and the nation as a whole. So I want Africa to just be the place where people can come to and they have their problems solved, where it's a global marketplace for the best technology in fintech, the best technology in healthcare. I'd like to just summarize with, it's been great to see how where we are now is where our ancestors were hundreds of years ago, which was building communities and understanding that they were their brother's keepers. The success of their brother was because of their own success. So just that spirit of Ubuntu, which is I am because we are, and we are because I am. I'd like to see that across the continent, despite our different countries. I know we usually get a bit pissed off when people are like, oh, Africa is a country. It isn't, but it is. So I'd like to see us come together, for wherever we are, East Africa, West Africa, North Africa, South Africa, to just be Africa and help each other out, make sure that we are the best that we are for ourselves and the best that we are for our brothers and sisters. Yes.